The Mothman Prophecies, Part 1. My journey into the bizarre and haunting began with a single phone call. As a journalist always on the hunt for the unusual, I'd heard my fair share of strange stories, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, laden with an urgent desperation. "You need to come to Point Pleasant," the woman insisted. Something terrible is happening here. People are seeing things? Things? I asked, trying to keep my skepticism at bay. "What kind of things?" "He's real," she whispered, almost too softly for me to catch. "The Mothman." I'd heard of the Mothman, a creature of local folklore described as a winged being with glowing red eyes. It was a story that seemed more suited for a Halloween campfire than serious journalism. But there was something in her voice, a palpable fear that made me pause. 3 days later, I found myself driving into the small, quiet town of Point Pleasant. The Ohio River meandered alongside the road, its waters reflecting the pale light of the setting sun. The town itself seemed ordinary enough, a collection of modest houses, a few shops, and the occasional rusting remnants of old industry. But the air felt heavy, charged with an undercurrent of dread. My first stop was the home of Mary Mallet, the woman who had called me. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to press in from all sides. She greeted me at the door, her eyes darting nervously as she ushered me inside. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know how it sounds, but people here are scared. They're seeing things, hearing things. It all started a few weeks ago." Mary led me to her living room, where she had laid out a collection of newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photographs. The articles chronicled a series of strange sightings dating back to the mid-1960s, when the Mothman legend first emerged. "People have been seeing the Mothman again," she explained, her fingers trembling as she handed me a photograph. "Look at this." The photo was grainy, taken at night, but it clearly showed a large, humanoid figure with wings folded against its back. Its eyes, reflecting the flash of the camera, glowed an eerie red. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Where was this taken?" I asked, my skepticism starting to waver. "Near the old TNT area," she replied. "It's an abandoned munitions factory just outside of town. That's where most of the sightings happen." That night, armed with a flashlight and my camera, I ventured out to the TNT area. The site was as desolate as Mary had described, a labyrinth of crumbling concrete bunkers and overgrown vegetation. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I walked deeper into the complex, I felt an inexplicable sense of being watched. My heart pounded in my chest, each step echoing in the darkness. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to my imagination running wild. But then I saw them, two glowing red eyes staring at me from the shadows. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The eyes were unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to capture the sight, but as soon as I raised it, the eyes vanished. I stood there, alone in the darkness, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Had I really seen it, or was my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't have an answer, but one thing was clear. Something was happening in Point Pleasant. Something beyond the realm of the ordinary. I hurried back to my car, my thoughts racing. This was just the beginning. There were more people to talk to, more stories to uncover. The Mothman was more than just a legend. It was a living, breathing enigma, and I was determined to unravel its mystery. As I drove back to my motel, the full moon casting eerie shadows on the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The Mothman Prophecies, Part 2. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Mary. "You need to meet Linda Scarberry," she said hurriedly. She saw the Mothman up close. Linda lived in a small house on the edge of town, her front yard dotted with colorful flowers that seemed out of place in the midst of the town's gloomy atmosphere. She welcomed me inside, her demeanor calm, but eyes haunted by something she couldn't quite shake. "It was a few nights ago," she began, her voice steady but low. "My husband Roger and I were driving near the TNT area when we saw it. It was standing in the middle of the road, wings spread wide. We could see its eyes. They were red, like burning coals. And then it took off, flying alongside our car for miles before disappearing into the night." I listened, captivated and disturbed. "Did you get a good look at it?" I asked, scribbling notes furiously. Linda nodded. "It was about 7 feet tall, with wings that must have been 10 feet across. Its body was humanoid, but those eyes, I'll never forget those eyes." As I left Linda's house, I couldn't shake the image she had painted in my mind. The creature was becoming more than just a story. It was a presence, something real and terrifying. I spent the rest of the day interviewing other townspeople. Each story was eerily similar. Sightings of a large winged figure with glowing red eyes, always near the TNT area. Some spoke of strange noises in the night, others of an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to settle over the town like a heavy fog. That evening, I visited the local library, hoping to find more historical context. As I pored over old newspapers and books, a pattern began to emerge. The Mothman sightings in the 1960s had coincided with a series of tragic events, culminating in the collapse of the Silver Bridge in December 1967, which killed 46 people. The creature was often seen as an omen of disaster. The librarian, a woman named Dorothy, noticed my interest and approached. "You're looking into the Mothman, aren't you?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. "Yes," I admitted. "It seems like the sightings have started again." Dorothy nodded gravely. "People are scared. The last time the Mothman appeared, it didn't end well." Her words lingered in my mind as I left the library. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. I decided to take one more trip to the TNT area, hoping to catch another glimpse of the elusive creature. This time, I was prepared. I had brought a better camera, binoculars, and a voice recorder. As I walked through the overgrown paths, the air grew colder, and an uneasy silence settled around me. The only sound was the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel. I reached a clearing and set up my equipment, scanning the area with my binoculars. For a long while there was nothing, just the eerie stillness of the abandoned site. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow passed over the moon, and there it was. The Mothman, perched on top of a dilapidated building. Its wings were folded, and those piercing red eyes were fixed directly on me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, fear mixed with excitement. I raised my camera, snapping photo after photo. The creature didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. And then, as if sensing it had been seen enough, it spread its wings and took off, disappearing into the night sky. I stood there, breathless and shaking. This was real. The Mothman was real, and I had the proof. But, with proof came questions. What was it? Why was it here? And what did its presence mean for Point Pleasant? As I packed up my equipment and headed back to my car, a sense of urgency gripped me. The Mothman wasn't just a legend, it was a warning, and I needed to find out what it was warning us about before it was too late. The Mothman Prophecies, Part 3. I spent the next few days in Point Pleasant, immersing myself in the community and gathering more accounts of Mothman sightings. The townspeople, once reluctant to share their stories, began to open up as word spread of my investigation. Each account added another layer of intrigue and dread to the mystery. One afternoon I met with Jeff Wamsley, a local historian who had dedicated much of his life to studying the Mothman phenomena. His bookstore, filled with books and artifacts related to the legend, served as a hub for those seeking answers. "You're not the first to come looking for the Mothman," Jeff said as we sat in his cluttered office, "but you might be one of the few to take it seriously." He pulled out a map of the area marked with pins indicating reported sightings. "Most of the recent activity is centered around the TNT area, but there have been sightings near the river and even downtown." Jeff shared a particularly chilling account from a fisherman named Dave Roberts. Dave had been out on the Ohio River one evening when he spotted a large winged creature flying overhead. It circled his boat several times before diving into the water and disappearing. Dave described the encounter as the most terrifying experience of his life. I decided to meet Dave in person. He was a grizzled, weather-worn man with a no-nonsense demeanor. We sat by the river, the water lapping gently at the shore as he recounted his story. "It wasn't just the size of the thing that scared me," Dave said, staring out at the river. "It was the way it moved, almost like it was playing with me. And those eyes? I'll never forget those eyes." As I collected more stories, a pattern began to emerge. The Mothman seemed to be drawn to places where people gathered, as if it was observing us, or perhaps warning us. The sense of impending doom that accompanied the sightings was palpable. One evening I received a call from a young couple, Mike and Emily, who claimed to have seen the Mothman near the local high school. They were clearly shaken by the experience and eager to share their story. "We were parked in the school lot just talking," Mike began, his voice trembling. Then we saw it standing on the roof of the gymnasium. It looked like it was watching us. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. It was huge, with wings that seemed to stretch forever. When it saw us looking, it let out this terrible screech and flew off. I asked if they could show me the exact spot. That night, we drove to the high school. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows reflecting the faint light of the street lamps. Mike and Emily pointed to the gym roof where they had seen the creature. As we stood there, an eerie silence settled over the area. Suddenly, a loud rustling noise came from the nearby trees. We all turned, our flashlights illuminating the dense foliage. For a moment I thought I saw a pair of red eyes staring back at us, but then they were gone. "It's out there," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible, watching us. We quickly left, the fear still lingering in the air. Back at my motel, I reviewed my notes and recordings, trying to piece together the puzzle. The sightings were becoming more frequent, the sense of foreboding stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The Mothman was not just a passive observer, it was a harbinger of doom. And whatever it was warning us about, it was getting closer. As I prepared for another night of investigation, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Mary Millette. "Come to the bridge," it read. "Hurry." A chill ran down my spine as I grabbed my gear and headed out. The Silver Bridge, a vital connection across the Ohio River, loomed in the distance. Its dark silhouette against the night sky filled me with a sense of dread. As I approached, I saw Mary standing near the edge, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She pointed toward the middle of the bridge. There, perched on the steel framework, was the Mothman. Its wings were spread wide and its red eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The creature stared at us, unblinking, as if it was trying to communicate something. Then, with a sudden, powerful flap of its wings, it took off, disappearing into the night. "What does it mean?" Mary whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest, "but I think we're about to find out." As we stood there, the bridge creaking ominously in the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of a disaster. The Mothman's warning was clear, but the full extent of its prophecy was yet to unfold. The Mothman Prophecies, Part 4. The following day, the atmosphere in Point Pleasant was tense. News of the Mothman sighting on the Silver Bridge had spread quickly, and the townspeople were on edge. Many chose to stay indoors, fearing what might come next. I decided to visit the local police station to see if they had received any reports. Chief Warren, a gruff but kind-hearted man, welcomed me into his office. "We've been getting calls all morning," he said, rubbing his temples, "people claiming they've seen the Mothman all over town. It's causing quite a stir." I showed him my photos from the previous night. He studied them carefully, his expression grim. "I've seen a lot of strange things in my time, but this is something else. We need to figure out what's going on before people start panicking." As I left the station, my phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Jeff Wamsley. "Meet me at the museum ASAP," it read. I hurried over to the Mothman Museum, where Jeff was waiting with a group of researchers. "We found something," he said, leading me to a back room filled with old documents and maps. Jeff pointed to a map of Point Pleasant, marked with the locations of recent sightings. "It's following a pattern," he explained. "The sightings are forming a path that leads directly to the Silver Bridge. If the Mothman is truly a harbinger of disaster, then it seems to be pointing us to the bridge." A sense of urgency gripped me. We had to warn the authorities, ensure that the bridge was inspected and secured. I called Chief Warren and explained our findings. He promised to have a team sent to the bridge immediately. As evening fell, I joined the inspection team at the bridge. Engineers and safety inspectors examined every inch of the structure, looking for any signs of weakness or damage. The atmosphere was tense, everyone on high alert. Suddenly, one of the engineers shouted, "I found something!" We rushed over to find him pointing at a section of the bridge's support beams. There were cracks, small but significant, spreading through the metal. "We need to close the bridge," the engineer declared. "It could collapse at any moment." Chief Warren didn't hesitate. He ordered the bridge closed and barricades set up to prevent anyone from crossing. The townspeople watched anxiously from a distance as the inspection continued late into the night. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Mothman was watching us, its warning finally heeded. The sense of impending disaster had not vanished, but at least we had taken action. Just then, a deafening screech echoed through the night. I looked up to see the Mothman, silhouetted against the full moon, its wings outstretched. It hovered above the bridge for a moment before disappearing into the darkness. The following morning, the news spread quickly. The Silver Bridge, a vital connection for the town, was damaged and would require extensive repairs. The engineers confirmed that if it hadn't been closed, it would have collapsed under the weight of the morning traffic. The Mothman had indeed been a harbinger of disaster, but its warning had allowed us to prevent a tragedy. The townspeople, once skeptical and fearful, now viewed the creature with a mix of awe and gratitude. As I prepared to leave Point Pleasant, Mary Millette approached me. "Thank you for believing us," she said, her eyes filled with relief. "You've helped save lives." I nodded, deeply moved by the experience. The Mothman remained an enigma, its true nature and origin still a mystery. But one thing was clear. It had come to warn us, and we had listened. Driving out of Point Pleasant, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes watching me. Instead, I saw only the quiet town, now safe from the impending disaster. The Mothman's prophecy had been fulfilled, and the legend would continue to live on in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed its warning.